Perfect. Okay. So more importantly, we all live here in Beaver Dam Lake for a reason. Everybody moved here because it is a lake and everybody wants to be around a lake and everybody wants a beautiful lake. And we also want a healthy lake. So our first starting point is going to be getting the lake back. And our second point is going to be getting the health of the lake to where it needs to be and maintaining it. The purpose of this meeting is the secondary part. We are, as a board, working outside of this with the DPW, trying to expedite everything we can do to get the lake back as soon as we can. So for this purpose of this meeting, as a team member, be asking yourself when we're going through this, what does this mean to you and what can you do to make a difference? So, oops, this does not work well. Okay. First of all, this is not the first, this is actually the second meeting. I unfortunately didn't have the privilege of attending the first one. Erica, can you walk us through briefly the status of the actions from the first meeting?
Absolutely. So the big thing that we were waiting for following the first meeting was the sediment results. And I know that Wally, you're planning on getting into a little bit of review regarding what we were testing the sediment for, what sediment we were testing and why. So that was the big outstanding item. The other thing we were going to do was have a couple of outside entities come and speak, and we were going to connect with them. So that was Moodna Creek Watershed, Stream Keeper, and River Watch. Did I mix that up? Stream Watch, River Keeper. So Tom Coral did get in touch with some of his connections, and I know that he is working to schedule some of the guest speakers to come and share their expertise with us at this meeting. We were also, after we found out from experts the best way to test some of the inflow of the lake for some of the nutrients that you're going to discuss, we were going to talk to some homeowners that live along those tributaries so that we could possibly access them from their properties, but we didn't get to determine where we wanted to test. So that hasn't happened yet.
Okay. Okay. I'll talk to Erica offline just to make sure we get all those actions captured with due dates and how we're tracking them. Okay, so from this meeting, when I want to get out of it, the short term, I want to identify actions that we must do or plan to do before we start lake refill. We don't want to lose any window of opportunity, what we could do before that takes place. And then secondly, long term, identifying the actions that we're going to start to take to establish and maintain a healthy lake going forward. For people that have never heard of this before, we call it prevention, detection, and correction. It's kind of like prevention is eat healthy and exercise. Detection is go for your annual doctor's visits to make sure you're doing good. And correction means you didn't do what you were supposed to do in prevention and detection, and now you're in correction. So you have to go for a surgery or some kind of corrective maintenance on it. Same thing applies to the lake. Prevention is huge. And we want to make sure everybody understands what they can be doing in the prevention terminology associated with the lake. Detection, that's a lot of the testing we're doing to say, how are we doing with maintaining the health of our lake? And then correction, unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, so we will be in status where we're in corrective mode already, trying to get back to where we need to be, and throughout the year, trying to keep it where it needs to be. So always be thinking when we're talking about the lake, what could we thinking of the PDC model, if you will. Just to get some common ground, I want to establish a mission, a vision, and values. Our mission is we want to develop, communicate, and implement a lake health management plan that identifies the key activities necessary to maintain and improve the health of Beaver Dam Lake environment for the Lake District, i.e. all the people that live back here for the reason of wanting to enjoy a lake. Through teamwork, which means not just the board, it's all the residents and everybody else has to commit to this. We want a strong community ownership, transition, and maintain Beaver Dam Lake health to top decile performance in the New York State by June of 2022, with no occurrences on the DEC listing of, they're called HABs, harmful algae blooms by the county. When we have a harmful algae bloom, what that means is you can't use the lake. It's very, very hazardous to use. You need to stay out of the water. Don't let your dog swim in it. You just have to avoid it. We don't live on the lake to have to avoid it, so we don't want to have HABs. New York State actually does track that thing, and I'll show you later on the slide how New York State has been doing for the last, or Beaver Dam has been doing for the last couple of years. Values, everybody on this team is going to be respected, looking for all innovation, Respect means that there's no bad questions. If you're not sure about something, just lay it out there because it's maybe the best thing that we're not even thinking about. Just lay it out there. Innovation, again, the same thing. There's no bad answer. Let's look at every possibility. Teamwork, we can't do it alone. We need everybody to step in. Stewardship, don't just stand by the wayside, but accept some ownership and go forward and make a difference. And integrity, hold by what we're saying. The team is we're going to think of it this way. We have internal and we have external. It's going to be applied to the lake also later, but the internal is the board itself and the residents. And we're going to have internal tech specialists that work within us that have become experts associated with all of this. External is Orange County DPW, which we're very, got a great working relationship with them. They're very, very supportive of what we have going on out there, out here. New York State DEC, they're kind of like our regulator. They keep their thumb on what are we doing. We need permits, and I know some of our homeowners actually have some interface with them. External tech specialist, we don't want to invent a wheel every time we're going to do something. There are people out there that do this for a living. We're going to be consulting with them very, very often to say, what can we learn from you and what can we do better? And then environmental and consulting companies. They're the people that we've had them in the past. They do all our lake sampling. They do all our treatments for us. Same thing here. When we get to the reports later on, they're the people that came out here and did the soil samples for us and the vegetation sampling. And Erica and Fred, if you want to jump in anytime, if you want to add something, please interrupt me. There's just a pictorial. This is what we don't want to have. This, if everybody that lives out here, you saw the algae blooms. We don't want to get there. We want to try to avoid these to the best of our ability. That's all done through lake health management, and we'll get into that more. And the right side just shows, this is actual picture of our lake when we had the sailboats out there. I think it was 2017, last time we effectively used our lake. Pictorial diagram, the lake is the body of water, which has a lot of things come into it and a lot of things go out of it. The things that affect the lake health are the things within it, such as the sediment reflux, and the things coming into it, like groundwater, the runoff and storm drains, precipitation itself, discharges, and we'll go into more on that later on. I'm going to try to get through these slides as quick as I can, because it's more important to be talking about the results of the environmental testing we have done so far. Think of the lake as being a process, and the lake itself is the lake out there, and underneath there, obviously the soil, which is what we unfortunately all see right now. Give me 1 second. Is what we all see right now. The coming into this.
Wally,
Yes.
excuse me. Are we
ahead.
supposed to be seeing the slides, or is that going to come up later? Because
Oh,
we're
you're
not
not seeing
supposed to do.
What are you seeing right now?
You.
Well, that's a bit. The whole time you've been saying that?
Yeah.
Well, that stinks.
I've been seeing your slides.
That's
Can Dave, what are you seeing while your slides?
I see the slides.
Okay.
I see the slides as well.
So Fred, what
What
might
am I
be
doing
helpful-
wrong?
What might be helpful for you? Thanks, Lee. I see Kevin and Sarah. Thanks too. If you hover up it might be the right side where you see speaker view. Give that a click, or maybe it says gallery view for you.
what?
Hold
Oh,
on.
there it is.
Can't see that part. I just did it.
Yeah, I see it, but I can't make it full screen. Although, here we
Okay,
go.
okay,
Got it.
Thank you.
You're back?
Oh, come on.
You good?
Got it.
Okay,
Yes.
great. But I'll go over the other slides we already covered, Fred, with you later on.
I've already seen them. I'll go over with.
Okay, so think of the lake. It's influenced by what's within the lake and also what comes into the lake. These are what we call variables. Things coming into the lake are called the external loading variables, which is the stream that feeds the lake and all the neighbors that live on that stream and all the way up to Stewart Airport. All the stuff that goes into that stream comes into our lake and affects the quality of water in our lake. The smaller tributaries that you come in, I think we have 2 or 3 of them that actually come into our lake. Anything on those tributaries actually provide our inputs into the lake, which directly affect the quality of the water. As you walk around the lake, you'll see a bunch of storm runoff drains. As you walk by, you say, okay, that's great. Where does that go? They actually dump directly into the lake. So anything up on the roads, if the sewer happens to back up and goes back into the storm runoff drain, it just dumps right into our lake. Don and myself and everybody else that lives on the Fred, you have waterfront properties. You have to really, it's educational to me to say, wow, how much of a role do I really play in affecting the quality of lake? There's a lot of things going on with that. With the fertilizers that you put on your lawn, your downspouts, if they run across your lawn, or if you have a garden in your backyard and you're feeding your garden with fertilizer and that runs in there, it affects it. Within the lake itself, you have the sediment soil, which has the phosphorus and nitrogen already in it. Vegetation, we see a lot of that out there. As that decays, that contributes to it, and effects of the past chemical treatments. So all of these right here directly affect the overall quality of the lake. And we have to ask ourselves, which of these are controllable, which of these are not controllable, and which of these are cost feasible to actually control. Okay, there's going to be a test at the end of this, by the way. So be prepared for the exam, but it's going to be on statistical analysis. Think of the lake, basically, the Y part is the lake quality, and it's a function of X's, which are we call variables. And what we're trying to do through this with our Lake Health Committee, we want Y, the lake health, to be the best we can by determining the function of those X's that we just talked about, the internal and external loading. Which of those can we actually control and be cost feasible with controlling? Now, you're going to hear me say pretty much the same thing in 3 different ways. So lake health, again, is a function of nutrient management, which is the phosphorus and nitrogen, the runoff coming into the storm drains, the tributaries up by Little Britain School actually has treated water that dumps into it, but in my understanding, they do have a Speedies permit, but that directly affects the quality. The trailer park off the Station Road is a possible source contributing some negative inputs into our lake, these are all things we got to go look at. There's no quick answer to any of this, but this is the level of detail we're going to go into to try to maintain and manage the quality of our lake. On the lakefront homeowners, we're going to get educational stuff out relative to fertilizers, gardens, downspouts, everything we need to do as lakefront homeowners. The stream inlet, Fred is on this already. We're trying to set up a methodology and how we're going to start doing sampling at the stream inlet to say what are the variables coming into the stream, and then erosion with the soil. We might need to start planting plants and vegetation around the perimeter of the lake to prevent erosion. And like I said, Eric and Fred, stop me anytime if you want to add anything. Controlled methods, like I said, we need to balance. Everybody here is here for multiple reasons. We live in New York. It's very, very expensive to begin with. The last thing we want to do is drive our taxes out through the ceiling by saying we're going to put crazy things into our lake to make it a 4.0. We need to balance cost with what's really, really effective. So we have to be open-minded and say, what are all the things we can be doing? What has been done predominantly in the past was chemical treatments, which was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was copper sulfate compound, Fred?
Yeah, we've been using the copper compounds for the algae treatments. I've investigated the 2 that you have, Phoslock and alum, which the alum is the least expensive of the 2, but unfortunately, New York State does not allow either of the 2 to be used on a lake of this size. So we're kind of at this point at a standstill, except for the direct treatment of the algae with copper.
Okay. And again, there's no quick answers coming out of this meeting. The purpose of this meeting, again, is going to be able to say, this is great. Where are we currently, and what are the actions to get us to where we need to be? So at the end of this meeting, what we need to do is I'm going to look for everybody to contribute what they're suggesting for actions.
Walter, I'm just gonna, I'm not sure. I want to take the temperature of the room that we have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a quick poll just to see if folks are kind of understanding the relationship here. So if you could answer the poll that's on your screen.
Am I allowed to answer?
Yeah, you can answer.
Okay. I'm the first one.
Okay. It looks like we have most everybody answered. So So most folks on the call do understand the relationship between phosphorus and nitrogen. So if you're the phosphorus, nitrogen, and algae. So I'm not sure if it was explicitly said, but phosphorus and nitrogen are what feeds the harmful algae that's growing in the lake. So if we have an overgrowth of algae, it's as a result of the excess nutrients. So
Yep.
that's why we're focusing on this.
Yep. Just thinking from the standpoint, we're trying to avoid the algae blooms. So we want to control the phosphorus and nitrogen at minimal levels to keep the algae blooms away. Okay. Herbicides for the vegetation, obviously. I think there's a lot of unpredictables right now. In the past, we knew what vegetation was in the lake, which was the normal type vegetation and what was good and what was the bad. Right now, we have a lot out there. We're going to be having a meeting this coming Wednesday with the company who had done all the soil sampling for us and the original vegetation study, for them to clearly explain their understanding, what the information has told them, and so make sure we clearly understand the report and the recommended actions out of that relative to the vegetation. And again, these are just some control methods I'm laying out there. Aerators, I'm sure everybody saw other lakes when you drive by them. They have these pretty sprinkler systems that take water from the bottom and bring it up into the air and spray it in. It looks like a fountain. Looks pretty awesome. It's good for mixing it. Some of them run on solar power. They're not that expensive to operate, but they are very expensive to put in. Mixers to prevent the stratification. Think of the lake levels. You have the top of the water, the middle of the water, and the bottom. You have to be able to mix that, otherwise it stratifies. So they actually have devices out there to keep the mixing going to help improve the water quality. We put new sluice gates in as part of the dam construction. I know we had sluice gates in the past. Other lakes in the area, what they actually do is what's called drain downs every winter. It does two things. It allows the lakefront property owners to do maintenance on their docks. And it also, when it drains down, all the weeds around the perimeter of the lake freeze, and it helps to control the weed population. I don't know if we've ever done this or looked at this, but it's on the table for consideration.
Wally, I understand that this hasn't been done in a long time. Tom, maybe you can elaborate, but just because they have not been able to open up the gates on the old dam to properly draw it down. I think that's what I've heard, Tom. Is that correct?
Is Tom on the call?
Tom is on the call, but he is muted.
You're
Tom,
muted, Tom.
unmute.
You're muted, Tom.
Okay, are we back now?
Hey,
You're
Tom.
back. We can
I
hear
know
you.
I was never there to start, so how can I be back, right? Sorry. Yeah, that's the primary reason we have not been doing that. Quite frankly, little thought was given to that for many, many years. So then when some thought was given to it, the sluice gates were, well, number one, the 24-inch was inoperable for quite some time. The 18-inch was quasi-operable until the later days when it was vibrating, and we decided that if we were to open it, we might never be able to close it, and we'd have a lot of people pissed off at Tom Coral. So nonetheless, it's never been done to my knowledge here. We did talk about it in the latter years when I was involved, but never been done. So
Okay.
I think from what I've read, it has it's a viable approach.
Okay, thank you, Tom, for that. And then one of the other methods we're looking for the vegetation is replace an invasive with beneficial. That requires a lot more research on our part, but we're going to start identifying what are the invasive species of vegetation we have around our lake, identify what are the beneficial, and help educate lakefront property owners on how to do this process. And Tom, also, please jump in anytime if you have something to add.
Okay. Well, we do have quite a bit of loosestrife around the area. I've got a fair amount on my property as well, which we try to beat back. But it's been around for many years. I personally have not seen a phenomenal additional growth on the loosestrife. There are many other evasives that we ought to look into, but quite frankly, I think that, and we can look at this closer, but I think that the drawdown might assist with respect to the evasives in the shallow area.
Okay.
That's all I've got.
Thank you for that.
Wally, one other thing, it's a slower process, but one that we may want to look into, and we have a little bit in the past, is what they call floating islands to absorb some of the phosphorus that's in the water. And I was talking to Princeton Hydro a while ago about this, and one of the things they might recommend is if we can identify a major tributary that's bringing a lot of phosphorus in, to eventually put one there to kind of absorb some of the phosphorus as it comes in. They'll point out that it's not a rapid overnight remedy, but it's something that, in addition to other things, might be helpful.
Okay, thank you for that, Fred. And again, we're going to do at the tail end of this thing, I'm going to look for short-term and long-term actions. And what we'll do is do the cost feasibility, and then we're going to agree as a committee which ones we're going to go after. Okay. Right now I'm at the point where I'm going to turn over. Basically, we're looking at, we have data on their table. The only data I have that is pretty good data right now, review the results from the last CSLAP report, which was in 2017, which I'll cover what that is. I'm going to cover each of these reports in detail and the recommendations out of them. So we'll look for the commonalities, what the external experts we have actually hired, what they're telling us, what they're seeing, and what they're telling us we should be doing. So it's the 2017 CSLAP report, the most recent, the 2020 Northeast Aquatic Research, the vegetation management refill analysis from last year, and the soil sample report, which we just got results back on last Friday, I believe it was. Is that correct, Erica?
Yes, sorry, I'm realizing you can't see me nodding. Yes.
Okay. And then the other is I believe everything but the soil sample report has been uploaded to the Orange County DPW website, but we'll be looking at getting that up there. Okay, so let's just look backwards a little bit and say, how are we doing? The New York State DEC, they actually keep a report card, if you will, on how many hazardous algae blooms you have. It's by county, it's by every lake in New York State. This is Beaver Dam's report card from back in 2012 to 2019. The HT is the worst. That's actually confirmed high toxin blooms. When you get into that, the lake is not usable. Don't go in the water. Don't take your dog in the water. Confirmed algae blooms are kind of the same way, but it's not nearly the same level. And then they have the lower level one, which is suspected. So you can see in 2013 and 14, we had the validated that we had confirmed high toxin blooms. And in 2018, I think the actual CSLAP report indicated that we were closed, I think it was 14 or 15 weeks out of pretty much the whole summer because of high toxin blooms. But a lot of that, you have to keep in mind, the lake was supposed to be drained in 2018, and correct me if I'm wrong, board members or Tom, they did not do any chemical treatments of the lake because of the fact we anticipated draining, so they didn't want to waste the money on it.
Go ahead, Tom.
I can't confirm on 218 on that one. I was not that closely involved at that date.
I believe that 2018, we had reduced treatments. I believe we did 2 out of the proposed 5. I may be wrong, but I think that was the year that we just did the first 2.
Okay. Okay, we'll see going forward in the reports. It kind of indicated in 2018, we really weren't that good. So for everybody on the call, this just kind of gives you a timeline of between 2012, 2019, how we've been performing. Interesting enough, in 2019, they indicated that we had a suspicious bloom, even though the lake has been completely drained the whole year of 2019. And that's because they actually do flyovers. So if they saw green in the lake, they thought it was a bloom.
That's good.
Yep. Okay. So what does the current data tell us about our lake? So like I said, we're going to look at these 3 reports. CSLAP report from 2017. They came out and they said we have too much phosphorus in our lake and the levels of nitrogen are too high. Our water clarity is very bad, and our algae samples that were collected dominated with cyanobacteria, which is the blue-green algae, which produces the toxin. And at Beaver Dam Lake, was on that list I just showed you, the New York harmful algae bloom notification list for 18 weeks in 2018. On that same report, the recommendations that came out of it was to reduce the nutrient and sediment loading, i.e. the phosphorus and nitrogen. So we got to be asking ourselves a question. The experts are saying we got to reduce these things. How are we going to do that? Buffer of native plants next to the water bodies. That's what Tom was referring about. If we have to remove the invasive plants and start replacing them with native plants that are actually beneficial to the lake. Reducing erosion of our shoreline. We have to get out there and start monitoring. Does this actually, they're saying it was obviously a concern. I'm not sure where they're specifically talking about. Do you have any insight on that, Fred?
So what was that?
Erosion.
The erosion,
Yeah, the CSLAP report indicated we have erosion on shoreline properties.
Really?
I don't think that was ever part of the CSLAP.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it came out in their recommendations.
Oh, okay. I just don't, for the type of testing we do, I don't see where erosion would be something we'd even be able to monitor.
Well, the only thing would be turbidity, and maybe there's a generality that they're throwing in there, that if we've got poor clarity with the Secchi dish, that would possibly indicate turbidity, and the turbidity has to come from someplace.
True.
Then you don't know whether it's your tributaries or your shoreline, which I don't know from a CSLAP report how they get that either.
Yeah, I couldn't see that, and I wouldn't even know where to begin starting on that to say we can go after that. But
Nope.
again, what we're doing right now, we're laying all the data on the table to say, what does it mean to us, and what actions do we want to take to try to improve? Next one had to do with controlling runoff into the lake. This is important for property homeowners. If you have downspouts on your home that just run across your property and dump into the lake, and you could actually see if you have any erosion. Actually, some people have gardens that in their backyard, and if you got to be really careful if you're putting fertilizer into your garden and everything, that the water is not just going into there and just carrying that right into the lake, because all we're going to do is make sure we have a very green lake instead of a green garden.
Yeah, I believe that most fertilizers now have gotten, at least in New York, have gotten away from phosphorus.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thanks for saying that, Tom. When you buy fertilizer for your lawn, there's going to be 3 numbers on the bag. The middle number is the indicator of how much phosphorus is in your fertilizer. Make sure that that is at 0, either if you're applying fertilizer to your grass, or if you're using a company like Lawn Green, make sure that their fertilizer has no phosphorus in it, which is that center number. It should be 0.
Yeah, Tom, Wally, I checked with our people at Lawn Doctor, and they certified that there is no phosphorus in any of the treatment chemicals.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Thank you, Fred, for adding that. Okay, that was, and again, that was the CSLAP part of it. This next report is the most recent one, the 2020 Northeast Aquatic Research Vegetation. Eric, I believe, has already covered this on previous calls, so if I'm boring you, let me know. I won't go into a lot of detail on it. But the report was released to us in June of 2020. Effectively, what we did is we hired this company to go out there and take a look at the vegetation that resulted from the lake being drained too long and say, what does it mean to us and what should we do, if anything? In the report, they said our lake has been notoriously eutrophic, meaning very poor in water, very poor in oxygen, and very poor in water clarity, and the phosphorus is very high. They said our lake is in dire need of strategic long-term nutrient management. So we're starting to see a common thread here. CSLAP saying it, they're saying it, but keep in mind they're reading from the CSLAP report also. So we have to do remember back in the prevention, detection, correction. In the detection, we have to be doing the testing to say, what is our nutrient management really telling us? In 2018, like we said, BDL was on that harmful algae bloom notification list for 18 weeks, which that's a lot. Lake was inaccessible and it was human health hazard. Sediment sampling is needed to quantify internal nutrient loading. So what they were saying is we need to go take samples out in the lake bed to say how much nutrient is inside the internal loading within the lake, not what's being brought into the lake by the external, but what's already in there. We did do those samples. We'll talk about that in actually the next report coming up here. But we did take those samples and we determined we actually have to do at least one more sample. We need to commit to an inlet monitoring program to quantify annual watershed phosphorus and nitrogen loading. What that means is all these tributaries and the stream coming into it, that's our primary inlets coming in, and they're highly recommended that we commit to a program to quantify how much phosphorus and nitrogen are those things bringing into our lake. Need an estimate of the lake's total phosphorus and nitrogen annual load from watershed and bottom sediments. And again, when you talk about the budget of the lake, we're talking about the total phosphorus that's in there and what the sources are. Lake water quality has been historically very poor in vegetation. This is an interesting line that they put in the report. Lake water quality has been historically very poor, and our vegetation that's out there now will not likely make it worse. They don't say it's going to make it better, but they don't say it's going to make it worse. They just do something they didn't want to do. I did. We'll talk about that at the end of this, but we had one of the questions we have on the table is what should we be doing with the vegetation that's out there, if anything, and is it cost feasible? Their report, though, kind of said what they were saying. The phosphorus and nitrogen is in the sediment inside the ground of the lake. If everybody remembers when the lake was drained, it looked like a barren desert out there. And then suddenly it looked like Chia Lake. All these things just grew out of nowhere. Mother Nature did us a favor. It actually pulled nitrogen and phosphorus out of the lake bed into those plants. So what they're saying, when those things decay and go back into the soil, it's not going to make it any worse than it was. It's just putting back into the ground what was already there. And again, these are the recommendations out of that same report. The town must measure the aerial extent of dissolved oxygen loss, both in a horizontal and vertical space. Fred or Tom, if you want to chime in on any of these, because you have a lot more background on this than I do, to help explain those.
That particular one, I'm at a loss.
Okay.
I don't know what they're talking about, aerial extent.
Yeah, that's confusing. I agree, Tom. We can measure dissolved oxygen in water samples. I think we have the capability of that, and also phosphorus, but to aerial extent, I have no idea what they're talking about.
I mean, I have a fair amount of information on aerial hyperspectral imaging and what have you, and we can certainly measure what algal blooms are there, and we can tell you what type of an algal bloom it is, the hyperspectral data, but I have absolutely no information that tells me that you can come up with a dissolved oxygen from a hyperspectral image of the lake. I'm at a loss on that one.
Okay. The action out of that then, Tom, to us is to get a better understanding. We paid for this report. We paid these guys to take samples, and they put together this report for us, and they gave us the results and they gave us recommendations. We are going to have a Zoom call with them this coming Wednesday. So this is the type of stuff we want to draw out and get better understanding of, hey, we paid you guys to do some, help us understand what you're telling us.
Yep.
Exactly. One other thing on that topic about the plants drawing nitrogen and phosphorus out of the sediment. That's very true, except that the fact that once the lake is refilled, and a lot of this sediment is not just going to lay there and die and decompose. A fair amount of it is unfortunately going to break off and float. Unfortunate where it's going to be accumulating around the certain areas of the lake. Fortunate that some of it may go over the spillway and be gone, which is going to theoretically reduce the phosphorus. So I know you'll bring this up later, but a big part of this might be trying to eliminate some of this floating debris.
Did I lose you, Fred?
No, he muted right before he finished his sentence.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you hear me or not?
Yep, you were good. It muted in the middle of your last word. You're all set.
Okay, that was very good. Yeah, the point behind that, Fred, which is a great discussion, is, and I think Tom agrees, the vegetation out there could be a lost opportunity to help reduce our internal loading of phosphorus and nitrogen in the lake. we did have another discussion with the county, and I have the action to put together what I am recommending or suggesting back to them that they'll present to the DEC and say what would be involved for us to be able to do this. The problem we have is the window is closing on that quite rapidly once we start filling.
The one, if you're going to have the Wednesday meeting, that would be a pretty good question to ask, is what percentage they might expect is actually contained. I don't think the report gave us a percentage of how much of the phosphates might have been brought up into the vegetation itself.
That's actually where Erica's comment comes from
Oh,
also.
okay. Okay.
For
Well,
example,
Yep.
I
Eric
think
had
what
this-
you're going to see is in the report that they're saying that the phosphorus and iron bound is relatively low. First of all, that was surprising to me, except the fact that maybe, just maybe, there's a lot of it tied up in the growth.
Mhm. Yeah, because in theory, if there's a large enough percentage that is pulled out into the vegetation that's above the ground right now, if you were to hypothetically be able to remove even 10, 20% of that vegetation,
Absolutely.
you could help to reduce your internal loading from going back into the sediment.
All right, 100% in favor of that. If it's 1%, then you say, guess what? Let's
1%. Yes,
let's not worry about it, right?
exactly. And there's got to be some point there where it makes a difference. And that's on our agenda, though, Tom. Thank you for that, to speak with the consultant company this coming Wednesday.
Yep.
Thank you. Next one had to do with, let's do some phosphorus sampling prior to the refill. We did do, Erica, how many samples did we totally do so far?
I believe it was 6, but I don't think it was from the areas we were expecting.
Oh, it even says there, they recommended 6. We'll talk about that in the next report. But what came out of this, though, is in their report, which I'll talk about next, is they did not sample in the deepest part of the lake, and they highly recommend testing in the deepest part of the lake, which is kind of confusing. But we did talk to the county today about putting together a change order for the purchase order to go out and get the money to do one more sample out in the center. Next recommendation had to do with the other stuff: ammonia, nitrogen, iron, manganese, and sulfur released during anoxia. Fred, can you add anything on that?
Again, those are typical results of, as you say, anoxia, which simply means no oxygen in the probably mostly the deeper end, in which case your ammonia goes into, your nitrogen goes into an ammonia complex. Iron is in the non-oxidized ferric, which is not soluble. And the same thing with the magnesium. The sulfur gets tied up as hydrogen sulfide, which anybody who's ever done C-SLAP testing can smell readily in the deeper ends. So this is all a result of you're not getting oxygen down into the deeper areas, which is allowing the phosphorus to just become a phosphate and just be soluble and to just go, not phosphate, but a non-phosphate, because that's the P2O4, to just be free to link onto anything that'll grab it, like, for instance, the aquatic weeds or algae.
I think you want to mute again, Fred.
Just finished this sentence with the word algae.
Oh, I can never tell with the punctuation. Okay. The big question I had in this one, is there a specific recommendation being made in here?
They're just saying we need more oxygen. That's basically it, and the only thing I can think of in the deeper end is your aeration, which is going to be costly, but you have to somehow get that water moving, get the upper layer to the bottom area, so you don't get your thermoclines, and you allow more oxygen into that level. In fact, I think I remember, Tom, a while ago, no, it wasn't you, it was somebody else was talking about possible aeration, but I don't think they were referring to the deep end. I think they were talking about around the shoreline where the HABs tend to accumulate.
Yeah. Do you have
End of
anything to add?
sentence.
Tom, do you have anything to add there?
Hey, You went silent on me for a little while, Fred, and I didn't hear your last probably 2 sentences.
Well, I got to stop using the space bar, but apparently it's ruining me. Um, I guess my last statement was that a lot of people, not a lot of people, a few people have talked about aeration in the past, but I believe they were talking mostly around the shoreline areas or the shallower areas where the HABs tend to accumulate. And where you really need it is areas where you're not getting natural oxygenation.
Yeah, I think that that's probably accurate, and I think that most of the systems on the aeration will take care of some of the issues up top, but I don't know that they necessarily do the mixing that Walter alluded to earlier as one of the potential mechanical options for solving that issue to get the oxygen down to the lower level. I
I,
forget which is the hypolimnon and which limnon is which, but you want to get the upper layer down to the bottom, get them mixed up, and get your oxygen down to the bottom.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, where you need it the most is the most difficult because your shallow areas are going to have your oxygen. It's going to have the sunlight. It's going to have the warmer water. And all you're doing with aerating the shallow end is just dispersing the fine cyanobacteria particles, which are there anyway. They just tend to coagulate in the shallower, calmer areas. So you're not doing anything to destroy them.
Yeah, I agree, and that's one of the reason I mentioned to Walter that way back when I was a little bit more involved, we had started to look at an item called the Solar Bee, and the Solar Bee does just that. It has a huge propeller that essentially is simply rotating or changing the top layer to the bottom layer,
Mm.
mixing that up. There's a large solar panel up top that keeps the electric motor running, and you just it's relatively expensive. I think back when I was looking at it, they were about $30,000 a clip,
Well,
and it was guesstimated back then that there probably would need 5 of these around the lake to take care of the problem. But
well, if we look at the price of chemical treatment, it doesn't take too many years for it to be payback.
you're absolutely right. And lo and behold, my sense is that the DEC is hoping to push people away from chemical options anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I have a question about number 3 on the screen right now. As I'm rereading this, I am wondering if the specific recommendation, because I see the comment, what is the specific recommendation here? And I'm wondering if the last bullet, the frequent historical use of copper sulfate as an algicide may impact the sediment's ability to permanently bind phosphorus because it also binds to iron. Is the recommendation to use that less frequently?
Well,
Is
not
that just how
only,
or do you understand what I'm asking?
sure, in fact, the state would love us to get away from copper because a couple of years ago, when we still had a lake, they did some sampling and they found out that the copper was building up from years of treatment. And they were literally forcing us to go to a more expensive treatment, which was lower in copper.
That was what, the Q-trine that they were pushing
Yes,
to? Yeah,
yes,
yeah, that's about at least double the price on that.
yeah.
So yeah, I think if indeed there is a viable mechanical method, that would be pretty exciting. I've not taken enough time or am not smart enough to pull up all the articles on something like the Solar Bee to get the real story on it. There have been some success stories and some disasters, but I think that's one of the things that should be put to the top of the list, knowing that the DEC is trying to push us that direction.
That's important to know. Yeah, like I said, Tom, everything, we want to put everything on the table and we want to look at everything in the light of what it is.
Yep.
I think it's very important to put that out there and let's not just, let's give it its due diligence.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, the next one, and again, each one of these items, we're going to talk with the consultant on Wednesday to go through each one of these in detail to get better understanding as well. The watershed nutrient investigations, the load estimates, they're basically telling us here that we should implement a inlet monitoring program for the streams and the storm runoff. I don't know, Erica, can you give me an update? Have we started doing this? I'm a little behind on the eight ball here.
No, we've not, because we were hoping to have some experts come in and tell us the best methodology for taking those samples.
Okay, so
But
the
we do have the materials in the office to do some of this testing.
Okay. So I
ourselves.
understand we need the expert to be able to tell us what are the logistics for implementing this, but we do have the materials to do it.
Yes, I also just want to tell you that it's 6:48. It has to be kept.
I do,
on.
I know. Stop it.
Timekeeper there. Okay.
That's-
You asked for it.
I know I did. You're absolutely right. Okay. So the takeaways are that it gets very confusing. The takeaway out of all of this is we know what the actions are. We know what they told us. We know what their recommendations are, but we have the action out of all this is we're going to have a follow-up discussion with them on Wednesday to get a lot better understanding of what they really mean in the report. Now, this is the team part of it. This is actually the last slide in it. From the actions, what I'm looking for now from a team perspective, what do we feel we need to include as short-term actions before the lake refills and in the long-term bucket after the lake refills? Ones I have on here right now is on Wednesday, it's imperative we have the Zoom meeting with Northeast Aquatic to understand their two reports and what they mean to us. Obtain the additional soil sample in the deep section of the lake, which we're getting the change order, like we said, to get the money to go do that. Renew our 2021 CSLAP sampling commitment, which my understanding, because we didn't do anything, we paid already in 2019, I guess it was, but we didn't do anything. So part of our funds are already paid up there.
Correct. All we have to pay for now is the nice full membership, which is $175.
Okay. Now, again, this is the short-term bucket. The next one says, review the option for mechanical vegetation removal with the Department of Public Works and the DEC. That I'm running to ground right now. And we talked to DPW today. I'm going to put together something more on that. And I want to talk to the consultant on Wednesday to get a better understanding from their point of view, what's going on. And I think we all have a vested interest in wanting to do something with it. But I will be honest that I think we're running out of runway.
We're running out of time, unfortunately.
Yep,
That doesn't necessarily mean it might not receive a Hail Mary and get something done. You know?
Yep.
That's where I'm working for, Tom, and I'm going to try to push as hard as I can to try to do that.
Yep.
So anybody have any other recommendations for any short-term actions, things we have to do before we start putting water in?
I would just maybe, I know it's a bad time of year, but maybe recommending to all the homeowners that if you can remove any of it, it'd be a good time to do it. And I know we talked about this use of a weed whacker.
Yep.
True, it doesn't get the roots out, but if you can cut down the tops and rake them and get rid of them, that's still a plus.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny. I cleared out probably about 20, 30 yards off the front of my property already. And unfortunately, when you get to the cattails, they're very difficult to cut with a weed whacker.
Yeah.
So,
That I agree with that 100%. I've tried.
okay.
Well, it's like Molly, we did it during the summer, and you can actually, we're at pretty successful pulling them out.
We didn't get to the cattails.
We didn't get to the
No,
cattails?
we
Okay,
had some easy stuff.
okay.
I guess the only other question might be whether there's anything that can be done on those trash racks
Right.
to somehow make that maintainable over the future. In other words, I was down there, don't tell anybody, but I was down there the other day and looked at those, and I could just see that if we do have some tree branches and what have you, accumulate on there, that we're going to be sucking wind.
Yep.
And is the only option sending down a diver to clean that off every season? Or is there some other rake that we can come up with that might be able to, pull some of that stuff off and bring it to the surface?
Yeah, it's going to be really important also as we go into the refill also.
Yep.
We'll be cycling. DPW is aware of our concern relative to that, and they're actually looking at getting a standing contract with a diver in place.
So they've pretty much discounted any other possible methodology other than the diver.
Exactly. We asked them from a different point of view, what would happen if during the refill, we were open the sluice gate to control level during our controlled fill, and all of a sudden the sluice gates get stuck. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Because you can't close it. And they said, well, they need a contract with the diver to be able to address that.
I would also guess though that if we had an alternative solution that we could present to them, they would be open to it.
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, my opinion, we're not designed for an alternative solution right now.
Right.
Normally have
Right.
rotating trash racks that do that. We're not going to do that.
Day late and a dollar short.
Big
You
time.
know, one thing at the meeting this morning, Wally and Erica, they did mention, or one of you mentioned the fact that they've seen tires and pallets and things like that they said it's not the contractor's job to remove it. And I can't help but think that eventually stuff like that is going to block that what do you want to call it, that protector.
As a trash gate.
Yeah, and anything that the community can do in that area now that the ground is frozen to possibly remove some of the big stuff
Yep.
that might be to our advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I actually brought that on the call today. There's a tire sitting right next to it, a couple of wooden pallets and stuff, get that out immediately.
But they indicated that's not their job to do it, so the onus is on us to do that.
Yeah. I'm going to try to include everybody. Lee, do you have any comments at all?
I'm good. Thank you, Walter. I'm
Yeah,
good.
thank you for joining us, Lee. Deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
Don, do you have any input, feedback?
Nope, you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. Kevin or Sarah Phillips?
They are putting feedback in the chat, so I
Okay.
can read what's in the chat. Is it easier to survey waterfronts prior to refill, maybe walking the perimeter? And then they also indicated they have removed 3 bags of trash, glass, and metal from the lake bed.
It's actually a great, that's an awesome idea, actually. Yes, it's a lot easier to do that. Would be definitely worthwhile. And it would also, what you have done, also, I've done that. Those little plastic grocery bags you get from Hannaford's, I took out about 27 of them filled with glass in front of my house so far. It's crazy. So yes, we should be encouraging everybody to be doing that.
Same
You
on
gotta
my,
stop breaking your beer bottles out there, Wally, and that wouldn't be a problem.
Well, if everybody stopped fishing in front of my house and drinking.
Yeah. Over the years, I bet you I have close to 50 of those bags.
I think we did remove a significant number of tires when we first emptied the lake. I know Larry and Tom had set up where they were getting picked up regularly by DPW because there were so many tires removed from the lake at that time. So
Wow.
What about a suggestion to have folks look at their property and remove any branches, sticks, what have you, that indeed are going to eventually, be lifted out and carried right down to the trash gates?
Yeah, if I can enter in, I think we've done a lot to discourage people from being on the lake. And so I think we need to be more intentional about what they can do, specifically like collecting garbage from in front of their properties.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, who's speaking there?
Kevin.
Kevin,
Kevin?
And the other question I had was, can we be a part of that Wednesday meeting?
Erica?
I think, I mean, it's a small and mighty group. If there were 20 of us, I would say it's probably not a good idea, but there's not very many of us on. So if you like, for the few of us that are on, I can send out I can send out the information. I also don't know if it's going to be a phone call or a Zoom at this point. So if it's possible, I will send you the info for the Wednesday meeting.
Okay, who
Cool.
was asking that question?
Kevin, what
Kevin.
time is the meeting?
We were trying to schedule it for 11 a.m. Wally, did they confirm 11 a.m.?
Yeah, that was actually, yes, he did, absolutely confirmed it.
Okay,
Okay,
11
thank
a.m.
you.
on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other suggestion for short-term actions? Hearing none, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, long-term, after the lake refills. Part of what I'm a big fan of, and I'm going to personally be doing a lot of this, is benchmarking other New York State lakes and local lakes, saying, hey, what's the best of the best? What are people doing? And try to bring back some winners that we can apply here at Beaver Dam. Implement the recommended sampling as the various reports have told us to do. And again, think of it in terms of prevention, detection, and correction. You need to do the sampling as part of the detection to say, how are we doing? What direction are we moving? You want to make sure we're moving in a positive direction. Volunteer groups to remove invasive weeds. We're not where we need to be there, but we do have weeds we got to remove now prior to refill. And after we do start to fill up, we're into an unknown, which we got to get a better grasp on, is what's going to happen with the weeds that are out there. They're going to start floating. Could we possibly start going out there skimming to try to remove them versus letting them float around down by the dam? Educate homeowners on their roles and what they can be doing, and establishing the relationship with the professionals or the service companies or the consultants. What other things could we add in there for the long term? Hey, Tom?
I'm looking at the volunteer, back up the recommended sampling. And what I think, and I haven't been recently involved, but when we were doing it back when, we were looking at a single point on the C-slab. And I've
Yeah,
often,
it's still singles point, Tom.
is that right? I've often thought that that is maybe not the best way. I think for a not too large amount of money, you can pick up alternate, like maybe three or four different locations, if indeed our sampling crew is willing and able to look not only at one point. The lake is a fairly large lake. It's not a huge lake, but I think you're going to see some differences between different areas. And Fred probably knows more recently than I do whether or not that makes sense or not. But I think sampling in different areas in the C-slap would be beneficial.
Well, the multi-point sampling would be beneficial at a lower, in other words, with the C-slap, as you know, Tom, you have a lower sample and a higher sample.
Yep.
The lower sample is generally where you're picking up a lot of the phosphorus because of non-agitation. So, and in the top sample, I would tend to think, and I could be wrong, that you're getting distribution around the lake because of wind, rain, and various other activities. But it wouldn't hurt at all. And in fact, it would be very easy to, while we're out there, just select certain areas to consistently take a sample, and we can do the phosphorus testing in-house for total dissolved phosphorus. We don't have to send it out for that, but if we want to get more complete, then we'd have to send them out.
Yeah, as I recall, the cost for additional sampling points was not onerous. And as you point out, you're already out there in a boat. You row over to another area and take another sample. So it's not a whole heck of a lot of additional effort on our side. And I think the cost comparative to what we spent on things like treatments for vegetation over the years is in the noise. I think it's minimal. So
let's take an action just to look at the cost of doing the additional sample points then.
Yep. But I think again, as far as the testing or sampling, it's really, really important to figure out the best way to sample the tributaries coming in.
Exactly. Yes.
Absolutely. I think that's where the smoking gun might lie.
Oh, wow.
for a lot of this phosphate. And we've never ever done that. And doesn't matter whether the lake is full, empty, or in between, you still have water coming in. You could test that.
Okay. Yeah, out of
The
respect
only-
for Barry's time, it's 7:02. I just want to keep it moving, but I think that right there is huge what Tom just added there. And more importantly, I need to get a better understanding why we've never done that, sample the tributaries.
May I?
Absolutely.
Kevin again.
Hey, Kevin.
In the interest of not reinventing the wheel, another thing as we look at other lakes, how do they monitor visitors and the watercraft that come from outside into the lake? I know that's a challenge for us, I'm sure.
The answer to your question is we don't. The only thing we try to do is to regulate access to residents only. And even that is only partially successful.
Well, I just say that in terms of how do other lakes do it?
Yeah. If they're a private lake, how do they do that?
Well, if you use Lake George as an example, or probably even other of the larger lakes, they have specific DEC checkpoints for anybody bringing a boat into the water.
Yeah. There's a lake that I found out in Connecticut. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they're very similar in size to us. They're a private lake. So that's a great comment, Kevin. Take a look at what they're doing to try to control the other boats coming out of the lake, so they're not bringing external things into our lake that we don't want into it. So we
Yes.
control what's coming into it. That's a great comment. Thank you. Okay. Any other recommendations for long-term? Lee, do you have anything?
You put it in the
Thank
chat
you.
box.
Thank you. My question is, I think the best bang for the buck is monitoring the main feeder stream, which is I think Beaver Brook, coming into the lake. If you look at the Google map, the stream goes through farm fields before it empties into the lake. So I think
Yeah, it does.
there's a lot of nutrient runoffs into the stream, and if we can do a good job in the monitoring and control the inflow, I think we could potentially be doing a lot of good with minimum resource commitment.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
The other comment that I was going to make on that particular feeder is that it does go by Little Britain School, and I haven't looked at it in many years, but Little Britain used to have a speedies permit that allowed, I think it was 5,000 gallons per day worth of treated, quote unquote, water going into that stream. So that, in my mind, begs the question is, what's in there? So monitoring that stream, again, may bring us right back to a smoking gun. And you say, well, why the heck is this not better treated water? And I believe the other tributary goes by Little Britain, the
Trailer Park.
trailer. Well, it's a 55 and over adult Brittany Terrace goes right by that area. And, there could be some septic that is leaching into that area as well. So those tributaries, in my opinion, are probably where we're getting a large portion of our phosphates.
Unfortunately, then the question is, once you have the data, what do you do with it? The only thing I can think of is, first of all, you're not going to complain to the state or to the county that they've got to treat the water. The only thing, unless one of the experts comes up with a better solution, is maybe just as a fly-by-night, one of these floating islands, but where that stream comes out.
I think there's potential for like a cease and desist if they're polluting our. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Teresa.
Well, I think that there may be something you can indeed do if you find a substantial amount of phosphates coming directly from a point source. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think we have to lie down and say, okay, we've had it for 20 years. We're going to have it for another 20 years.
No, agreed. We just have to identify it, but then I'm just not sure where do you go from there?
Yep. I think, yeah, coming back to the PDC, prevention, detection, correction. Let's detect it, find out if it's real. And if it is, let's look at our options for trying to control it and eliminate it.
I agree.
I think everything's on the table. Okay. Who am I missing? I know it's 10 after, so I appreciate everybody's time. Louis, do you have any comments you want to add? Or Don?
Nope. All good.
Okay, thank you, Don. Dave, do you have any comments?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Walter, for putting this all together. It must be taking you hours in putting this together. Just a PowerPoint.
I just want to, I'm looking forward to watching you swim across the lake with your dog again.
Yeah.
The dog is down. No, he doesn't want to do it anymore. So
I don't blame him. You're
It's
firing
just
me
the
out
way-
watching you do it.
it's just gonna be me.
That's okay. We'll come out just for you, Lay.
Great speaking with you today, Lilo. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Fred, do you have any closing comments or anything?
No, I just think that this is very informative, and the thing that I really, really need to, I guess it's like, I don't know, it's just very frustrating to try to educate any of the, especially the shorefront property owners to, they have the most at stake here. Of course, everybody in the lake area has something at stake, and it's called their home values.
Yep.
To take personal pride into, taking care of the lake.
Okay, let's put that on the radar screen as something we need to get a lot better at. So that's a good comment, Fred. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to Tom. Do you have any more comments before we close out? And then I'm going to give it back to
yeah.
Erica to close us.
My only comment is that I really appreciate your well-organized and thought-out agenda here and your work on it.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're bringing a level of professionalism that we've not seen for a while. So I really appreciate that.
I appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your help bringing us all together, by the way.
My pleasure.
Okay, Erica, bring us home. What do you got?
I would just say to Fred's comment, particularly that we have a really great megaphone right now between the email and the social media. And if there are certain things we want to call out and educate homeowners on, I'm excited to figure out ways to get those messages out to the community. So as this committee decides what those bullet points are, if you share them with me, I can disperse them pretty widely and try to make them palatable for folks to understand.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Erica. Okay, we'll assemble the minutes from this meeting and put together an action list, and we'll get it out to everybody who was on the call. But I deeply appreciate everybody's time. Have a good night.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot
Thank
for
you
putting
all.
it together.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your
again.
weekend.
Thank
Woo!
Thank you all.
Teresa, have a good night.
Say bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Al.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
John.